On a winter morning in December 1941, Field Marshal Walther von Brauchitsch walked out of Adolf Hitler's headquarters for the last time. His face, witnesses reported, was chalk white with fear. The commander-in-chief of the German army, architect of the stunning victory in France, overseer of the invasion of Poland, had just been dismissed. He would never command troops again. This was not the fall of an incompetent general. Brauchitsch was, by all accounts, one of the most professionally skilled officers in the Wehrmacht. His tragedy was simpler and more profound. He was a man of competence without courage, a technician of war who lacked the moral strength to refuse immoral orders. His story reveals how professional excellence, divorced from ethical backbone, can become an instrument of catastrophe. Good evening, generals, and welcome to a new episode of Men Around the Führer. As you know by now that we are talking about Walter Heinrich Alfred Hermann von Brauchitsch, entered the world on October 4, 1881, in Berlin, the sixth child of cavalry, General Max von Brauchitsch. Born into the Prussian military aristocracy, his path seemed predetermined from birth. Yet young Walter showed broader interests than expected. He was drawn not only to military matters, but also to politics and art. His father, perhaps recognizing this intellectual curiosity, sent him to the Französisches Gymnasium rather than a purely military academy. But tradition eventually claimed him. In 1900, at age 19, he joined the Prussian Army Corps as a lieutenant. His progression through the ranks was steady and unremarkable, the trajectory of a competent, diligent professional. In 1910, he married Elisabeth von Karstedt, a wealthy heiress with vast landholdings in Brandenburg, and together they had 3 children. The First World War tested and proved him. Serving as a staff officer on the Western Front, he participated in major engagements including Verdun and the Meuse-Argonne offensive. When Germany's defeat reduced the once mighty army to a shadow force of 100 men under the Treaty of Versailles, Brauchitsch remained. While others abandoned their careers, he stayed to rebuild. The interwar years established his reputation. In the artillery department, Brauchitsch modernized doctrine, emphasizing cooperation between artillery and infantry. Lessons learned at terrible cost during the Great War. He rose methodically. Lieutenant Colonel in 1925, Colonel in 1928, Major General by 1931. Historian Samuel Mitcham later described him as possessing an outstanding military mind and being perhaps the most capable and modern-minded officer in the army. His abilities took him even to the Soviet Union in 1929, where he directed secret military cooperation between the German army and the Red Army, collaboration forbidden by Versailles, but essential for maintaining German military expertise. He was, in every measurable way, a model officer of the Republic. In early 1938, Hitler systematically purged the army's leadership. Field Marshal Werner von Blomberg was forced into retirement over a scandal involving his wife's past. General Werner von Fritsch, commander-in-chief of the army, was removed on fabricated charges after he had dared question Hitler's war plans. The Führer dissolved the war ministry entirely and assumed direct control of the armed forces. Into this vacuum stepped Brauchitsch. On February 4, 1938, Hitler appointed him commander-in-chief of the army. The choice was deliberate. Hitler wanted neither a genius nor a zealot. He wanted someone competent enough to organize operations, but pliable enough to obey. Brauchitsch seemed perfect, respected by the officer corps, professionally skilled, but crucially, not a Nazi ideologue. But there was a problem, and Hitler exploited it ruthlessly. Brauchitsch, after 28 years of marriage, wanted to divorce Elisabeth and marry Charlotte Riffer, the daughter of a Silesian judge. His wife refused. The divorce proceedings required money, substantial money. Hitler provided it. With that loan, Brauchitsch's independence evaporated. He married Charlotte in September 1938. His personal happiness purchased at the price of his professional autonomy. As historian Matthew Cooper observed, this debt inextricably bound him to Hitler. The most powerful military position in Germany was now held by a man who owed the dictator everything. Brauchitsch's first tests came immediately. When Hitler planned the Anschluss, the annexation of Austria, Brauchitsch expressed private doubts about logistics. The operation succeeded overwhelmingly, making his concerns look timid. When Hitler set his sights on Czechoslovakia, Brauchitsch warned that defeating the Czechs would take weeks, giving Britain and France time to intervene. The Munich Agreement delivered Hitler his objectives without a shot fired. Twice wrong, twice humiliated. The lesson sank deep. The breaking point came in November 1939. As Hitler prepared to invade France, Brauchitsch and Chief of the General Staff, Franz Halder, believed the plan would fail catastrophically. They even considered a coup. On November 5, Brauchitsch gathered his courage and confronted Hitler, warning that army morale was dangerously low, worse than in 1918. He spoke of symptoms of insubordination. Hitler's response was volcanic. He accused Brauchitsch of cowardice, sabotage, and treason. The field marshal stumbled from the meeting chalk white with fear, so shattered he could barely speak. General Halder, watching Brauchitsch's collapse, immediately abandoned plans for a coup. Hitler then summoned the general staff and vowed to destroy the spirit of Zossen, army headquarters, if he detected further disloyalty. When Brauchitsch attempted to resign, Hitler refused. The commander-in-chief of the German army was now effectively a prisoner in his post, stripped of independence, serving at the dictator's pleasure. He would never openly criticize Hitler again. Poland fell in September 1939, conquered in 5 weeks. Brauchitsch coordinated the invasion with professional precision, showcasing the devastating combination of air power, armor, and mechanized infantry that would later be called Blitzkrieg. But victory came with moral compromise. He approved harsh measures against Polish civilians, justified as necessary for securing German living space. When Polish prisoners from the defense of Danzig's post office appealed for clemency, Brauchitsch rejected the appeal. They were executed. The Western Campaign of 1940 brought his greatest professional triumph. Brauchitsch had initially opposed General Erich von Manstein's audacious sickle-cut plan, which called for a surprise armored thrust through the Ardennes. When Manstein persisted, Brauchitsch had him transferred to the Eastern Front. Only when Hitler heard the plan directly and claimed it as his own did Brauchitsch accept it. The result stunned the world. France fell in 6 weeks. By July 1940, Brauchitsch joined 11 other generals, receiving the ultimate military honor, the Field Marshal's baton. He was at the pinnacle of his profession, celebrated across Germany. The intoxication of victory, as historian Ian Kershaw noted, caught up many military leaders in its spell. Yugoslavia and Greece followed in April 1941, another swift, overwhelming success. Everything seemed to validate Hitler's judgment. Everything suggested the next campaign would be the same. On July 21, 1940, Hitler asked Brauchitsch to begin planning the invasion of the Soviet Union. The field marshal, still riding high on Western victories, believed it would be another swift campaign. He was catastrophically wrong, but his error was more than strategic. In preparing for Operation Barbarossa, Brauchitsch crossed from military professional to war criminal. The Eastern Campaign was conceived as a war of annihilation. Nazi propaganda saturated the Wehrmacht with dehumanizing messages. Soviet soldiers were subhumans, Asiatic barbarians led by Jewish commissars. Brauchitsch not only permitted this indoctrination, he enforced it. In one order to his commanders, he wrote that harsh measures were needed for the forthcoming battle of destiny of the German people and demanded they cease all criticism of Nazi racial policies. Then came the criminal orders. In May 1941, Brauchitsch signed the modified Barbarossa jurisdiction decree designed to secure rear areas by eliminating anyone considered a threat. His modification was narrow. Use the order only where army discipline would not suffer. This was not humanitarian concern. It was about maintaining military efficiency. Worse followed. The Commissar Order, issued in June 1941, explicitly condemned captured Soviet political officers and civilians to immediate execution without trial. As the Nuremberg prosecution would later argue, Brauchitsch was forced by Hitler to sign a document that was genocidal in intent. He complied without recorded protest. His later attempt to soften implementation, directing that commissars should be shot only if their anti-German sentiments were especially recognizable, did nothing to mitigate his fundamental responsibility. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel later testified that both he and Brauchitsch signed the criminal orders. Unlike some officers who documented their objections or worked to subvert implementation, Brauchitsch left no evidence of resistance. The professional officer who valued precision and proper procedure applied those same skills to organizing mass murder. Barbarossa began on June 22, 1941. Initial successes were dramatic, but by late summer, Brauchitsch faced a strategic crisis. Army Group Center, driving toward Moscow, had the momentum to potentially capture the Soviet capital before winter. Brauchitsch urged Hitler to concentrate all armored forces on this single thrust. Hitler refused. He diverted the panzer divisions north toward Leningrad and south toward Ukraine. Brauchitsch recognized this as military folly. Historian David Stahel notes that Brauchitsch understood Hitler's decision would doom the Wehrmacht's goal of capturing Moscow. The field marshal submitted written memoranda objecting to the plan. But that was all he did. Brauchitsch wrote his objections and filed them away. He made no personal appeal, convened no meeting of senior commanders, leveraged none of his authority. He had learned his lesson too well. Disagreement brought humiliation. By the time Hitler reversed course in October and finally ordered the attack on Moscow, Operation Typhoon, the window had closed. The autumn rains came, then winter. German forces stalled within sight of the Kremlin's spires. Hitler needed a scapegoat. On December 19, 1941, with Soviet counterattacks throwing German lines into chaos, Hitler summoned Brauchitsch and unleashed a final tirade of abuse. The field marshal, already suffering from a serious heart condition and physically exhausted, was dismissed immediately. Hitler announced he would personally assume command of the army. Brauchitsch was transferred to the officers' reserve. He never received another assignment. He never saw Hitler again. The professional military command of the German army effectively ended that day, replaced by Hitler's direct, often capricious control. Brauchitsch spent the remainder of the war at his hunting lodge near Prague, a forgotten man. He emerged briefly in July 1944 after the failed plot to assassinate Hitler. In a final act of moral bankruptcy, he published a statement condemning the conspirators and praising Heinrich Himmler's appointment as commander of the Home Army. When confronted later by former colleagues, he claimed he was coerced, that a relative's life was at stake. Few believed him. The British captured him on May 8, 1945. Held initially in South Wales, he was eventually charged with war crimes and crimes against humanity. The prosecution focused on his role in implementing the criminal orders during Barbarossa and his complicity in the aggressive wars against Poland and Western Europe. In November 1945, Brauchitsch submitted a written statement to the Nuremberg Tribunal, claiming he wished to provide a frank and complete survey of events. What followed was anything but frank. He denied receiving money from Hitler for his divorce. He claimed ignorance of Hitler's war aims before 1941. He professed shock at the atrocities in Poland. Most damningly, he denied understanding the genocidal intent of the Commissar Order despite having signed it. The lies were transparent. As historian Jeffrey Megagy concluded, the statements were perjured. Brauchitsch, facing the consequences of his moral cowardice, chose one final evasion. In August 1948, the British announced his trial would proceed in Hamburg. But on October 18, 1948, Walther von Brauchitsch died of bronchial pneumonia in a British military hospital. He was 67 years old. He escaped the courtroom, but not history's judgment. Historians have struggled to fully capture Brauchitsch. Matthew Cooper called him a man of honor and integrity who nonetheless lacked the strength of personality to resist Hitler. Samuel Mitcham noted his outstanding military mind, but concluded he was spineless when confronted by the dictator. Robert O'Neill observed that Brauchitsch failed to use his considerable authority to oppose Hitler's excesses. These assessments converge on a single, devastating truth. Brauchitsch was a brilliant technician of war who became an instrument of genocide because he couldn't say no. When the anti-Hitler conspirators approached him in 1938, desperate for his support, his response encapsulated his entire career. I myself won't do anything, but I won't stop anyone else from acting. He wouldn't act. He wouldn't stop others. He would simply follow orders, execute plans, and hope that professional competence could substitute for moral courage. It couldn't. The tragedy of Walther von Brauchitsch is not the tragedy of an evil man. It is the tragedy of a capable man who chose security over principle, comfort over courage, and obedience over resistance. His field marshal's baton, earned through professional excellence, became the symbol of his complicity. In the end, his story poses a question that extends far beyond one German officer in one catastrophic war. What use is competence without conscience? What value has skill without moral strength? Brauchitsch had every qualification for command except the one that mattered most, the courage to refuse. That failure defined him, it destroyed him, and it warns us still.